1 second. Good morning. I thought I hit the button and I didn't. But good morning, everybody. Hi, Jan. Hi, Patricia. Anne. Oh, thank you very much, Anne. Yeah, that was fun. We did the misty trees last week. This week we have, in the U.S., we have Veterans Day tomorrow, where they honor all their veterans. Here in Canada, we celebrate Remembrance Day. So I wanted to do something kind of along that theme today. So why would anybody want to paint on tea-stained paper? Well, let me give you an example. Let me switch over here to my other camera. All right. So this was a watercolor that I did from an old black and white photo. And this is actually my father. So I used tea-stained paper to give it that really vintage look. The original photo was black and white. It was also quite small. And so I was able to paint it larger. If you just take the photograph and you try to enlarge it, unless you have some awesome Photoshop skills and everything, it's really hard sometimes. It gets very pixely and that sort of thing. But I've rouged in a little bit of color into the cheeks, into the eyes. I even added a little touch of, just a very slight touch of white for some areas there. But overall, the paper has been stained with tea. And it gives a really cool effect. So I wanted to show this because with Remembrance Day and Veterans Day, I thought, this seems to be fitting for that technique. And I haven't used it in a long time, and then I used it this week. So I thought, I'm going to share that with you guys. So what I want to do is take a piece of watercolor paper. Well, before I do that, I'm going to take my tea. Now, this is just an old pan. My tea is cold. It's very important that your tea not be hot. If your tea is hot, it will dissolve the sizing on your watercolor paper. So I'm going to pour this tea into this pan. I actually made the tea last night, and you can see it's fairly strong tea. So I wanted to have enough color here for this to actually tint it. So let me just quickly grab a piece of watercolor paper. Couldn't remember where I put them. All right, so this is a piece of watercolor paper. It will fit in here. So I'm going to place this in and make sure that it's fully submerged. You see, sometimes you get these little bubbles. So I want to make sure it's fully covered, both sides. I usually flip it over. And now I'm going to set my timer. So I'm going to set it for 3 minutes. That's generally how long I will soak my watercolor paper if I'm going to stretch it. So I'm doing the same thing. The only difference is that I am soaking my paper in tea instead of regular water. So meanwhile, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a piece of Gatorboard. And if you're not familiar with Gatorboard, it's it looks like foam core, right? It's got foam in the middle, but both the front and the back are covered in a very hard veneer. You know, it's not, it looks like foam board, but it's not. And sometimes it comes in white and sometimes it comes in this sort of craft color. And I use it over and over and over again. So it lasts a good long time. You know, eventually you get so many staple holes that it compromises the strength, but then I just cut it down and use it for smaller sheets. And so with this, I can use a regular stapler, which is why I love this material, because using a regular stapler is a whole lot easier. Not only putting the staples in, but removing them, because removing them, I think removing them is the worst part, actually. So now for this, I will also be using mainly sepia watercolor. Mainly sepia. If I decide that I want to get that sort of hand-tinted photo look to my painting, then I will introduce little bits of color, as long as it's not like really brilliant color, like very bright color, and sparsely add it. I wouldn't add good strong color to this, because it looks, well, it won't look old, it won't look natural. So on my other example that I showed you a minute ago with my father, you can see there's like just a hint of pink in there. I'm contemplating maybe tinting his coat and his hat. I just am not sure what color they are, what color they are in reality, whether they were kind of a khaki color or a khaki brown, or what. So if one of you happens to know what color this uniform might have been, that'd be very helpful. So, hi Marilyn, hi Diana, Bev, Diane, Berna, Catherine, Deborah, Melody. Oh my gosh, everybody's here today. That's great. Thank you so much for joining me. Now there's the timer, which means it's time for me to take this out. Let's stop the timer for a second. And I'm going to take this out. I'm just going to let the extra drip off. I'm going to set this over here for a second and move this out of the way. All right, so with my paper, now it's kind of cockeyed on here. I just set it down wrong. So I'm going to just try to get this on here a little bit straighter. And you'll see why in a second. I want to get it on there fairly straight. It doesn't have to be centered, but it does need to be straight. Because now I'm going to pick up my stapler, which I'm going to open right up. Now the problem with this kind of a stapler is that as soon as I hold it, this foot part kind of dangles down. So I usually use the side of a table when I'm doing this. So I will figure out where my stapler could go here. And my index finger here I'm using as a guide that I will run along the side of my Gatorboard, and that will give me a perfect spacing for all my staples. Okay, no, that one's a little bit too close. All right, so I'm putting approximately 1 staple per inch. So if it's 10 inches across, I'm putting 10 staples. But I can just slide my hand along here as I'm stapling this down. And you notice I keep turning the board. That's for 2 reasons. First of all, because I've got this darn thing hanging down from my stapler. Secondly, I don't want to be putting my stapler up here on my fragile watercolor that's wet. So always have the stapler hanging off. And again, I'm using my finger as a guide here. so that piece of paper is stretched, and now I just wait, you know, several hours for that to dry completely. So it may buckle a little bit while it's wet, and then it's going to flatten out again. So I know that it'll always dry nice and flat. So we're not going to wait a couple of hours. I've got another one here. So I've got a couple, this is what it looks like when it's dry, and then I've now put some masking tape over the staples. Let's make sure the masking tape's down nice. That gives me a nice edge, if, you know, if I'm putting in a colored background or something like that. Thank you, Marco. Yeah, thanks, Jan. Yes, I thank you very much for joining me. I'm seeing a couple of new faces, which I'm happy to see. Make sure you tag or let a friend know, because nowadays, you know that YouTube and Instagram and Facebook and all of those things, they really don't share that much, you know, unless you're one of those superpowers, that super influencers or something like that, that has like all this stuff, and I'm not that clever to do all that stuff, so I kind of rely on friends. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to tape down this. This is all dry now. I've done my drawing and I'm ready to paint. So I'm going to be using mainly sepia for this. These are some old boots. I got this photo online. I am not sure about the copyright, so I will not be putting it on screen or posting it. So since I'm unsure, I'm going to not share the actual photo on the screen. But you can certainly look up anything like that, or if you happen to have an old pair of army boots, then you just go right ahead and do this. But I thought army boots was appropriate for Remembrance Day. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit here. Actually, I'm going to switch my mode to so that you can see both me and my palette. So there we go. So you can see everything here. There you go. Not that you need to see my palette too much for the color, but it helps sometimes to see how diluted the color is going to be while I'm using it. Where do I get my Gatorboard? Well, I ordered this one. I think I got this one at Desserts, and they call it watercolor board. And but watercolor board, Gatorboard's basically the same thing, just different suppliers call it different things. Yeah, check your local art store. I'm not sure. Probably Above Ground Art Supplies in Toronto carries it. If you're from out of this area, you could also try. Even it's a product that's used by sign makers as well. So you could try a sign maker to see if they would sell you a little bit. I can get it from a place called Uline here, but you have to buy 3 sheets of 4 foot by 8 foot, so it's kind of a lot. And then you have to cut it down. So anyway, yeah, source it out in your area and see if you can find it. But it's sometimes called Gatorboard, like alligator, that kind of gator, Gator board, or watercolor board. Fantastic. It's so lightweight. I would have to say most people I know use this now, just because of its lightweight convenience. A lot of people use blocks as well, but I teach so many classes in the week that a block would never work for me, because I'm always on to the next painting and not always finish the first one. So I need to have multiple boards. In fact, I probably have, I kind of have an obscene amount, but I have about, I'm going to say about 15 boards, and they're all covered front and back. So there's always something on the backs of these as well. But anyway, so I get a lot of use out of them. Anyway, so let's jump in. So I'm going to start off with my boots here. Now, nothing on my boots is really white. Well, there's nothing white anyway, because my whole paper's tinted. but I'm going to focus more on where it's darker. Okay, so I'm going to come right in on my boot, and that hole is dark except for that little bit. So I'll work around my lights. Well, I already made a mess. There we go. So I'll come in here with, this is just with sepia. Sepia always looks a little bit of a different color until it dries. It dries a different color than what it looks like when it's wet. But I'm just going to work around my laces here for a minute, because the laces are going to have highlights, which I need to leave, and the top of the boot here needs to have a little highlight as well. Where the leather is cut, you know, at the top of the boot is lighter, so I'm going to leave that there. And wherever I see little areas of light, there's a little bit there I could put in, I have to paint around them. Now I could have masked them, I suppose, but I'm going to paint around them for this exercise. And that kind of touches the other color, but then there's a little sliver right here, so I got to paint around it and paint all of this in. Now there's not much color in these boots. These are old army boots, so of course they're not going to have a lot of color, so this would probably be just fine to do as a strictly sepia. There are sometimes times when you want to make it extra dark, so then I could add like you know, a little neutral tint or something to it to make it a little bit extra dark. How does a Gatorboard take to staples? Well, yes, I was saying that, you know, sometimes you get like many staples holes in there. You know, like this one is getting close to needing to be cut down to use for this size that I have now. I've been using this for an 11 by 14 or 11 by 15 1/2 quarter sheet, but this size is 9 by 11, so that it'll be, the finished size will be 8 by 10. Let me just get this in here and I'll zoom in just to show you how many times I can staple this. It's quite a few. All right, so here's the corner of my board. You can see how many times I've stapled into this. Like, it's a lot. You know, I've stapled into it a lot. The trouble when you are always using the same size is that, you know, you tend to staple in the same places. So this little border, this little border here does get worn down. So I'll just cut down the board, or maybe I don't even need to cut the board down. I can keep the board the same size, but I'll just use it for smaller 8 by 10s. And then I'll get a new board for my for my larger size. But I've used these like tons and tons of times. Like, it's not inexpensive stuff. It's, you know, it's pricey, but for me, I mean, stapling it down and taking it out, it's just so easy that it's well worth the expense to me. But to each their own, right? That's a good question, Margot. Tea stains pretty good. You'll find that if I tried to lift some off, I wouldn't get that off. It might lighten it a little bit, which would be okay, but it won't remove the tea stain. The tea stain is right in the fibers of the paper now. Now, just to give you some other food for thought, is that what about staining with other stuff, right? Like, what if I was doing a botanical and I wanted to do this in, say, a pink, right? Maybe I wanted a pink. Could I use tea that's, you know, maybe a strawberry tea or something like that? I find that some of those fruit flavored teas just don't have enough color in them. But why not take a little bit of your color, say a permanent rose or something like that, and stir it in and make basically a tea out of paint, right? So I could take that pan and I could put permanent rose in it and get it really thin enough to be absorbed into the paper, and then soak it the same way I did with the tea, and then I would have a tinted paper. So painting on tinted paper opens up a whole new range of options, right? So I think it's so much fun. So I'm going to come in here and going to keep painting. I'm kind of talking to you guys, but and reading, but I'm forgetting to paint here. So I'm going to paint around some of these shapes. I'll come back in and darken. I do find sometimes it's a little tricky to get sepia dark enough. It's actually a little bit see-through, this paint. So like it dries a little bit more transparent than you might think. Like you can see pencil lines through there pretty easily, right? And I'm not putting it down especially diluted. I'm putting it down pretty heavy. But I'm going to try and move this one along today, not take too long. And I'm looking, before I get to the lace, I'm looking, is it darker or is it lighter? It happens to be darker. So that means I don't have to stop when I get to the lace, because dark can go over light easily. So I might as well take this. I'm going to dilute, rinse and blot, and now I will just paint with some clean water here because I want to get to a highlight area, so I can thin it and get a highlight there. But that lace is darker, so I'm going to come down and I'm going to just paint this lace in. As I hold my breath for that long stroke. All right, might as well get over here and do this one too. I find long lines are much easier to do if you move your hand, like your whole arm, rather than, just the motion of your fingers to move your whole arm. Like I'm actually sliding my hand across the paper. So I sort of lock the brush in place, and then I pull. Yes, yeah, tea is used quite often for staining papers. So why not your watercolor paper, right? And as far as I know, it's not bad for it. It may not be, I don't know, it might be archival, I don't know. But even if it's not, the whole idea is to make it look old. So what's the difference, right? As long as it doesn't like literally deteriorate the paper, which it won't, it'll give you a really cool effect. So I'm going to keep coming in here. I'm going to paint around this lace. Sometimes the lace is lighter than the background. Sometimes it's darker than the background. So whether or not I'm painting the lace depends on what I'm doing and what's darker and what's lighter. Okay, so this is pretty dark here and pretty dark here. And I'm sorry I can't show you the reference, but you'll have to trust me on this one today. I didn't happen to have an old pair of army boots. I have old boots, but they didn't seem appropriate for the occasion. So I'm rinsing my brush, and I'm going to just paint with water in here just so that I get a light area and a dark area, and that there's no like real hard line there. I can paint into that wet area as well. So it's actually pretty dark right in here. So I'm picking up some really buttery paint here to get some really dark stuff tucked into some of these places. Right here. Okay, so I'm going to come in and I'm going to start darkening some of this up here. This already dried. At least I can show you one boot. I don't know if I'll get both done today, but we'll see. I don't want this paint too watery because I don't want it to blossom or anything like that. This is pretty fresh paint up here. So my paint that I'm adding to it has to be thicker so that it'll stick where I'm putting it. There we go. This has got to be nice and dark down in here too. Okay. So creating a little bit of dimension, you're going to have to put several values in here. And this kind of exercise is really good too, because speaking of values, gosh, you know, it's something that is either, is kind of a deal breaker with a lot of paintings, because you need to be able to create the form with value, not with color. Like, so really this is very crucial in terms of composition. I was just reading some of the comments here. Beetroot. Oh, beetroot, yes. That could be interesting to use. Yes, yes, you could use a pink to stain your paper as well. You could tint your paper with anything. And I remember when I was learning watercolor, and I remember seeing a bunch of tinted watercolors, and I think they were birds and flowers or something along that line. And I remember I just really thought that they were so nice. Now they did incorporate white paint, some opaque white paint for that. It was such a cool effect, you know, especially for things like, I don't know, cards and things like that. So, you know, if you really don't want to jump right in with both feet and try a full-fledged painting, try some cards or something. Just give it a try, because it's a lot of fun. Now, if you're trying cards, I would probably suggest soaking your paper and stapling it down, like, so your paper has to be a little bigger, right? Because you don't want staples in your card. So you need to have enough of a margin to allow for those staples. But cut a piece of paper, staple it down just so it stays flat when it dries, and then you can tear the edges of that to give that rough edge, you know, that decal edge kind of thing. Just place a ruler and pull back towards the ruler hard, and that will give you that kind of torn look, and then you can apply that to a card. So I probably wouldn't try to stain the whole card. Most of those cards, those pre-made watercolor cards that you buy, they're student quality, so they're have a lot of sizing on them. They won't absorb. First of all, they won't absorb as much of the color of the tea. Secondly, they'll wrinkle like crazy. Like so. Oh, which white do I use? Most often I use Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White. Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White. I'm trying to grab it here, even though it's kind of silly, because the the label's so worn off here. But it's Dr. P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White, and it's got a yellow and red label. And so whatever they use, don't use that to stain your paper because it doesn't stay. But it is kind of toothpaste consistency, but it thickens. It thickens pretty quickly, actually. Like, it doesn't take very long before this starts to get thick. Don't throw it away. Add some more water, stir it up, it'll be fine. And it dries really weird. It's like it dries like crystals. It kind of looks like you just opened up a jar of frost. It's all crystally in there, and it's really weird. But you just add, this is probably due for a little bit as well. But I'm going to take my little pipette, okay, this little gadget here, and I'll just put in a couple of drops from my clean water here and give it a stir with a brush handle. I'll take a brush handle and just stir that up. And that white works pretty well. You can put it on full strength or you can put it on diluted. You can even tint this if you want to. But remember that when you add white, this is very opaque, right? Very opaque. So it'll cover up what you've put down, but it'll also be super white, because white in itself is quite opaque. It's also quite cool. So it's not going to look like, if you put too much of this on and you've tinted your paper kind of this almond color, then it looks a little out of place. So if you use white, use it really sparingly. Really sparingly. Same with the other colors, right? To get this effect. All right, so I'm stirring this up, and just so you can see maybe the consistency of it, it's, it's pretty creamy, like maybe not, it's thinner than toothpaste now, but it's, what would I call that? Like mayonnaise. That kind of consistency. All right, so wipe that off, and don't think I'll be using any of that today, though, so I'm not going to add that in. I don't think this subject matter would suit any white. It would look probably better just kind of sepia. This is one of those keep it plain kind of things. So I'm going to carry on, and by the way, the brush I am using today is, well, the paper, first of all, is Arches 140-pound cold pressed paper. The brush I'm using is a squirrel hair brush, and it's by a company called Biaelk, B-I-A-E-L-K. And I bought this online. It was I've actually bought a set of them, and this is a number 10. It's a squirrel hair brush. I like it very much. It's a travel brush, which means I can put the cap on here like that, and throw that in my travel bag, and have a nice squirrel hair brush for this. So that's what I'm using. And sepia. My sepia is DaVinci, but any other brand would give you a similar result. I mean, as far as I know, sepia is pretty common throughout the brands. Like, it doesn't vary too much. But, all right, let's get in here. I want to poke in my darks, especially now, because it's going to keep me sorted in terms of what I need to do lighter. All right, so I'm just going to come along here. The edge of some of these laces is pretty dark. I have a feeling this is a modern photograph the one that I'm using. It's a modern photograph taken from old boots, like, as opposed to a photograph of old boots. I think back then, I don't think that you really could get pictures of old things like that. I mean, generally people only reserved photos for people's faces. You didn't often see photos of stuff, like people would never dream of taking a photo of their of their lunch back in the 40s or whatever. So you want to make sure that you know, whatever you're working from, it suits the style. But you know what? You can break all the rules. Why not do something modern in this style? Wouldn't that be fun? Right? Take something, I don't know, take a modern celebrity or something like that and make them look old-fashioned. You know, it's just kind of fun. Some fun things to try. Just reading some of the comments. I probably would not use food coloring for tinting my paper. I don't think food coloring is intended for to remain for very long. I mean, it only needs to stay on food long enough for the food to be eaten. So typically, I wouldn't use it in my painting, not food coloring anyway. So I think I would stick to your watercolors, but you can make basically a tea out of your watercolor and stain your paper and tint your paper. Soaking it like I did is really going to ensure that the whole paper gets covered more uniformly. I should make one note about making a tea out of your watercolor. I would, you know, in that 3 minutes that it's soaking, I would stir it, keep moving the paper around. And that's to ensure that the pigments don't settle, right? You don't want them to settle. Tea tends to be a little bit more liquefied than the actual pigments that we're using in watercolor. So I would keep that stirred up just to keep the pigments suspended in the water. Just make sure that you're not using hot. Okay, very important. Don't use hot water. You'll dissolve the sizing. Anyway, on we go to our painting here. So some of these are dark. It's unusual because some of the laces are quite light and some of them are dark and some of them are sort of half and half. I'm going to rinse this and go a little lighter on this one. A little lighter on this one. So sometimes I'm using this paint like butter. It's thick, like it's about as thick as it can be, like right out of the tube kind of thing. Other times I'm using it quite diluted. So it all depends on whether I'm trying to achieve something very dense and dark or if I'm trying to create a highlight. And I find in watercolor, and especially with this sepia technique, is that you really have to kind of exaggerate those lights and darks, because then otherwise it looks overly flat. So you really need to kind of punch those darks and get them dark, and leave the lights maybe a little lighter than what you're seeing them in the photo. Because the end result is that your the paint you're putting down is going to dry lighter, and then the contrast isn't going to be there. You won't have that full value range. So I want to make sure that I'm getting enough in there. So I'm going to zoom in on this. You might as well see this zoomed in now, since I'm working a little closer. So then you can get a better look at what I'm doing. And all right, so these laces do tend to look darker, so I'm getting this real dark in here at the bottom of the lace, like where the shadow on the lace, I know it's just a little thing, but it still needs a shadow for it to look like it's not flat like paper. Just reading back on a couple of notes here. Shopping list. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great idea with the beets. I think beets would definitely stain. The thing with some pinks, you do have to be careful though, because they will turn a little brownish over time. And so if I were making something pink, I would probably go to something like a permanent rose. The word permanent in permanent rose implies that it's not going to lose its color richness, or it's not going to alter color as time goes by. So when you see the word permanent in a paint color, that's what it means. My hand is steady. I guess so. It helps if you have these brushes that have these really nice points too. If you have a brush that doesn't have a nice point, look at the point on this brush. It's a big brush, but man, that comes to like a single hair at the tip. It's so sharp. So that really helps, I think. You know, when you're trying to do details, I can use this big brush for so many things because it's flexible. Like it's you know, I can use it sort of flat and put in a big wash, or I can put in very fine details with the same brush, which is what I love about these ones. So in a minute, I will use this very same brush. I could do the whole painting with this one brush. Honestly, I could. So put in a dark and then put in a light. I'd even put a little more dark in that one, just along that bottom edge. Okay, so I'm getting those darks in so that I don't lose track of where they go. There's a shadow right here. And there's actually a shadow that goes under the lace as well, so that kind of carries on over to the other sort of side panel of the inside panel of the boot. The heel is quite dark, so I'll put that in. And at this point, I have to work around the lace. Remember, the lace was darker than some things, but now it's lighter than the heel. So I need to, now I have to work around it. So the transitions from, like the lace could be all one color, but depending on what is behind it, I have to either paint around it or paint through it. So that's a little lighter at the bottom, so that works, and I can pop in a little extra color here or there if I need it. And then let's get a little more color going here. I will focus on this boot for the demo, and depending on time I'll get the other one going too, but under the boot is quite dark. Like it's really dark under here. But because it's a shadow, it's not going to have a very crisp outer edge. So that means I'm going to have to quickly rinse my brush and soften that edge before this paint dries. I'm sorry. So as I come along here, get that really up on the tiptoe of my brush to get that nice little point there. I'm rinsing out my brush well, and I'm going to blot it well, and I'm going to just run this blotted brush along this edge just to soften it. Rinsing and blotting again. I'm going to come from the other direction. There we go. So now I have a nice soft edge on that shadow, right? The boot's lifted up, so the shadow's not going to be crisp. It's like my hand. Can you see the shadow of my hand on the paper? But if I get closer, you can see that shadow gets a little crisper to see. So the further I pull away, the softer the shadow gets. So that's what happens here. The boot's lifting up a little more, gets a softer shadow. All right, let's continue on with some of these darks. Now, this boot's pretty beat up, especially on this toe. I don't know if that's just it looks like part of the boot's coming apart here or something, but it's a little darker and kind of beat up looking, so it doesn't have to be really pristine or anything like that. Now I'm going to get into some of the more soft creases and things like that in the boot, so I'm going to dilute my color a little bit. Right, get some of the shape involved here. My paint's a little bit less pigmented. A little bit along the toe. And along this part, this lower part, like on the sole, there's like a row of stitching there. So I'm going to just kind of leave a little space for the stitching. You'll see what I mean in a second. So I'm going to just leave that little space in the stitching, but then I will connect them. I think that stitching has to be smaller than that, so I'm going to get that little area narrower. Oh boy, really narrow. Got to join these while everything's still wet, so it looks like a dotted line, so it'll actually look like stitching. Both sides of that line have to be wet. I can't just do one side and let it dry and then do the top. Okay, so now I have stitching along there, and let's get a little more color in this boot. So I'm going to come in around this shadow here. I'm going to paint right over what I painted previously, and that first layer will show through. So look at that. Didn't have to paint around anything there. Just paint right through it. Here we have some folds and things, you know, where the tongue gets a little bit puckered and that sort of thing. So I'm going to leave a few little lights in there. And I'll come down to this part of the boot. It's going to get pretty light down here, so I'm just put my brush in water, and I'm just letting the little bit of dirty paint in my brush do the painting. Right. Same with this side. I'm just going to come over and paint right through all this stuff. Except that one edge, right? Where the end of the leather is cut there. I'll put that in there. And all right, so now I start fine tuning. So I'm going to start fine tuning this boot. I'm going to come up here to the top and get a little bit more dark in here. Now, to really get this old-fashioned look, I could do a little bit of dry brush in here. So that means getting more on the side of my brush and really not having much in my brush at all. So I'm actually blotting, right? You can see how dry it is. And I can actually pull my brush along and it will kind of skip over the texture of the paper and give me some interesting texture in there. There's just a little bit of color in here. It's not much. It's just a little bit right in that sort of curve of the, you know, the tongue is kind of curved like this. So down here where my thumb is going to be a little bit darker. So this is where my thumb would have been, down there. And I'm going to help to blend that so it'll be smooth. Just with a damp brush is what I used. And now my photo has kind of a white background. I haven't decided whether or not I'm going to put anything in my background here or not. This would be kind of interesting. If I wanted to sort of portray Remembrance Day or Veterans Day, I could, okay, so just getting a little creative here, I could place these in a setting. I could put an army helmet in behind. I could put scenery of a field of poppies behind. You know, use your imagination, right? These could be sitting, yeah, like I said, in maybe a silhouette of a battle in the background or something like that. I was kind of hoping to do some war medals, but I didn't have any. And actually, when I went to look for some online, there wasn't much to be found. At least not Canadian or U.S. It was other countries, but couldn't find any good references for war medals. So this is kind of nice. The army boots they look like they've seen battle. They've seen something. They have stories to tell, these old boots. So I'm just going to do, like, these can be I want these to look rough. So a little bit of dry brushing here. That's painting with the side of my brush to make things look a little bit worn. See, it skips over the paper and gives you that beat up look. Let me zoom in a little bit more. There we go. All right, so I'll start fine tuning this and really giving some character to it with every layer. And I'm going to try to cover up most of that paper, but I will use the paper for, like, the color of the paper as highlights in a lot of areas. But the majority of it's going to end up painted with this sepia. guess if I took something like a burnt sienna, I could tint these slightly. That might be a nice option. What do you say? What should I do? Do you think, would you like to see it with a bit of burnt sienna added? That could be interesting. Blot some of that off. Don't want it to be too much. And yeah, we're going to try and keep this one in under an hour today. So I have a lot of Zoom workshops coming up. So if you'd like to see it, something a little more complete, by all means, check out my my website, shelleypryor.com. It's over there in the corner, right over here, right there. And you can find all my Zoom workshops. I do those generally on Fridays. And this week is crystal. We'll be doing some crystal. At least the time of this live recording. It might be a little different if you're watching the actual recording, but at the time of this, next week's demo is crystal. But I have a whole bunch of different things that are coming up. Some more landscapes, and I can't think of everything that I have coming up. But every week there's something. And even if you can't attend it, it's all recorded, so you can watch it when you can. When you're available to watch it, you can watch it and stop and replay and do all that good stuff. Right, so building layers little by little. I think I can really create the volume of the shoe or the boot as I'm putting on extra layers here. Build it up slow. Got to get that old leathery look up in here, so just dry brush some of that in there. This has got to have a little bit more shape to it, so I'm going to put a little bit here, and I'm going to rinse my brush and blot. Might even drop a little more color in there while it's wet. That'll really give me some nice shading in there. Okay, so this is a little extra dark right in here. I do a lot of blotting of my brush, and it's to control the water. I never quite understood that when I started watercoloring, is that the amount of moisture in the brush is depended greatly on whether I was successful or not. So I have really learned to blot. Oh, that's awesome, Diane. Yeah, so Diane says she's going to try this method with some boots that she had in 1971. Wow. I'd like to say that was before I was born, but it was not. All right, so I'm going to come in, and maybe I want to get a little bit darker in a couple of places. So if that's the case, let's try adding a little bit of neutral tint, right? And we can really punch up some of these darks. So I'm going to take a little neutral tint and add it into my sepia. Right, and this will get it a little bit sort of blacker looking and just a little bit darker. Right, so some of these areas I can really punch them up, you know, those extra darks. See, that makes a difference, right? Just, it's still dark, but one more level, right? It's on a value scale, this would be like really as dark as you can get. And I'm going to get under this boot a little bit more too. Just soften this a little bit. I don't want that to have a hard edge, so soften this shadow. But now it's a little bit extra dark, which I think makes a difference. This is about as dark as I seem to be able to manage to get with just sepia. So I do find that I do need to add a little neutral tint to it if I want to get it extra dark. So some of these areas I want extra dark, and I will come in with that combination. Now the one thing I am noticing is that because the edge of the boot, you can see my pencil line there, the edge of the boot doesn't really show up against the background, so I may have to do something really light there, like super light, but just enough to show that there's an edge on that white, or on the edge of that boot there, where the leather meets the background. But I need to keep it lighter than what I've done below. Right, maybe I'll carry this down into here too. There we go. Now let's get back to some of this extra dark, because I need to get the values adjusted here. So the thing here is I really need to make sure that I've got extra darks, and I'm using a full value range to create form. It's very hard to create form without full value. All right, so this, I'm going to just twist this a little bit so it's a little easier for me to get in here, but this is going to be quite dark along here in this little inlet, this little inside portion here. Okay, so I'm going to start thinning this out now, because it's really dark right here in this spot, but then as it starts to come over, it's not quite as dark. It's pretty dark. There we go. And you can see it's a slow build. The one thing about a 1-hour demo is I could show you some of it. It's very hard to show a complete painting because of the level of detail that I like to do. And many of you do as well, I think. But I can show you enough to get you on your way, I hope. So I'm blotting my brush here so I can get a little bit darker in there. But I don't want to carry that all the way across, because this little portion here actually has a little light. So I'm going to come under here. Do a little bit of dry brush in there. Little changes in value. This is just, I mean, if for no other reason, this is a great exercise just to teach you about value, because it is so important for creating form. You need at least 3 values. More is even better. But, you know, to create form, you need a minimum of 3. Pardon me. So I'm going to keep coming in with a little bit of the sepia. I want to get these boots really scuffed up and battered looking, so I really want to get them kind of a little bit more choppy looking on the top, on the toes. The toes always get the worst abuse. And because this is leather, and sometimes you get like old leather can get cracks in it and things like that. I mean, that's when you're going to get your one-haired brush out, and you'll do that kind of thing if you want. If you want to go to that extent, it's, you know, that's entirely your thing. Yeah. So some of you will do it much looser. Some of you will work faster. And that's you. That's, you know, that's your painting style. People say to me, how do you find your painting style? And I said, I don't know. How do you find it? And then they said, well, you have a style. How'd you find it? And I'm like, I have a style. And it turns out I do. And I didn't even realize it. But I guess your style is whatever motivates you and creates you, like what makes you happy. Right? You know, if realism is your style, or if a particular subject matter is something that you constantly gravitate to, there's your style. You don't go seeking it, it finds you. Just kind of interesting. I thought, I was so amused when somebody said I had a style. Like, I do? All right, so there's some shadows on the laces here. Can't quite figure this one out. This one looks like it has joins up to that one. I don't know how they've laced this, but it's weird. All right, so I've got a couple of extra darks that I need to put in. So let me get some of that neutral tint sepia. And there's like lace holes that go up the leg part of the boot as well. So I'm going to put those extra darks in. This is really, really, really heavy paint, like buttery consistency. And there's a couple of holes here too. These ones kind of get hidden in the shadows, so you don't really see these other ones, but there we go. Trying to really build up some of these darks to really make them important, right? Even if it's a small bit, like, see, that was just a little tiny bit there, but boy, that was important. So when I say build up your darks, I don't mean make it dark everywhere. I mean add accents, and they can be very important in terms of creating shape and form. And you're quite right, Marilyn. Everybody struggles with values. It's probably right up there in the top 2 or 3 of what I need to get students to really start thinking about more. You can see it's, you know, just because it's one color doesn't mean it's like whip it together and it's fast. Oh, thank you, Diane. Oh, you guys are so nice. All right, so I won't start on the other boot. We're already past 11 o'clock, but that's the tea stained paper, and you can get in and do backgrounds and all that kind of thing too. And of course, with backgrounds, it's a matter of taking a larger brush, wetting the area first, and then dropping in the color, like I did here on my father. So. Anyway, that's it for today. I won't do both boots. I will just do the one. That's all that's needed for this demo. But you can see that this could look really neat. I probably will put a background in here, or at least that sort of antique-y vignette kind of thing, you know, where it's like darker in the corners, kind of like I did down here. You know, it kind of creates that vignette. So to create that, I had to wet a big area here and only put the color there. Because if I wet just to here, I'll have an edge. I'll have a line right where that water ended. So, you know, you have to go way, way, way past where you're going to put the color, and then drop it in. Make sure the color you're dropping in has the ability to flow a little bit so that it'll happen naturally. Anyway, so that wraps it up for today. Go make yourself some tea, but don't drink it. And tune in next week, same place. We'll see you then. Thanks so much for joining. Bye for now. Have a good week.